Hello, and welcome to the second installment of our program, Window on Collecting. I've got some wonderful things to show you today, things that are particularly near and dear to my heart, and have had a lot of influence on the work that I've done in my own luster pottery. I'm Paul Katrich, and I hope you've enjoyed the first episode, and this being number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, who knows how many out far we'll go. I hope we'll be hearing from you in the future to give us some ideas of some other things that we might be doing. But for the first instance, I'd like to talk to you about a potter from Ohio, actually from France originally, by the name of Jacques Sicard. He's a most remarkable person because he is a French potter, but he is principally known for his works made in this country. He worked at the Weller Pottery in Zanesville, Ohio for a very brief period around the early years of the early 1900s, of roughly 1906 or so. Stayed here was brought in by the Weller Company to do form a specialized type of technique. Stayed here for a couple of years with his assistant. He and his assistant made everything that was being made. And then they went back to France, taking their secrets with them. No other company in the United States did anything quite like what they were doing. The technique, the work is usually called by Weller Sicard or Sicardware. Considering how difficult it was to make, there's a surprising amount of it around. I'm surprised how much I see in the marketplace. It is rare, but it's not so rare that it can't be obtained. A lot of pieces have trivial damage and such on them too because the ware is earthenware fired. It's not fired very hot, and they can be susceptible to knocks and abrasions and such. Sicard was trained by Clement Massier, the famous French potter and family of potters in France before he came over, and a lot of other potters seem to have passed that way in Europe. Wares of this type, although there are lusters of one kind and another at probably every significant American pottery that was working during the arts and crafts movement in the United States, wares of this type are unique to Weller and unique to Sicard. They are a European phenomenon. There are several other French potteries that made things that are similar, and some in Germany, and to a smaller extent in England, although technically speaking they're a little different. We'll try and talk about those at another time. But I think I borrowed a very nice cross-section of pots from a number of sources in order to bring them to you today so that you can see just how pretty this ware is. Not everybody likes it. It's very dramatic. It can be a little extreme at times, but those of us who are a little dramatic and extreme, it's something that we want to get as much as we can get our hands on. From a technical standpoint, I've often referred to this, my own expertise in glazes, as being the Rolls-Royce of glazes. I'm not aware of any other pottery ever having been made in the United States that is as complex as this, as difficult as this, and as impossible really to replicate as these pieces are. Weller pottery, like most pottery, I'm sure there are exceptions, but Sicard is generally within this category. It's cast in molds. An original piece would have been made out of a modeling clay or wax or plaster or some other material, and then a liquid clay would have been poured into a mold, and multiples would have been made. Sicard is a decorator. He's not a potter. This elaborate piece, Art Nouveau piece with the beautiful handles on it, is something that would have been pulled out of a mold, and there would have been many multiples of it made, and they would have been decorated in various ways. He would take some blanks that were more commonplace from the company and work on them otherwise. What's interesting about Weller's luster and Sicard's in particular is this sort of beautiful Tiffany-esque matte surface and all of the elaborate decoration. On a really fine piece, this full rainbow complement of colors that exists is unlike anything you'll see in any other pottery, and the satin matte qualities of them are highly unusual. You know, sometimes in my own work, when I have a piece that has 6 or 7 colors on it and different surfaces, people will, that have not made pottery before, will assume that I've got some magic bottle of glaze that I can pour 6 or 7 different colors out of. And that's not the case with me, nor would it have been the case with Mr. Sicard. Getting into too deep into the technical weeds of the thing would be complex, but it's a very difficult technique, and not all the pieces are made in the same way. There are chemical fuming processes involved where chemical salts were introduced into a kiln at a high temperature and then it impacted on the surface of the pots. In fact, in Tiffany glass and Steuben glass and iridescent glass at the same period is iridized by a very similar technique, as is carnival glass, in fact. There are clay paste mixed with pigments that are painted on the piece and then washed off later, leaving an iridescent residue. There are other overglaze techniques involved that relate to what is called China painting. 6, 7, 8, even acid etching, I've been told, or at least I can surmise from having examined many pieces of Sicard. But a lot of it is lost to time. A lot of the chemicals are no longer available or couldn't be used with any degree of ease, so this is not something that you're going to be seeing again. The decoration can be a little limiting because one of the things that I've noticed with this technique is that there's sort of no middle modulation. What that means is that it's sort of like a very high contrast photograph. You either have blacks or whites, but there's no gray center tone. And so Sicard is almost always decorated with flowers or abstract shapes, stars, stalks of trees, something like that, where a middle tone can be done without. There are a couple of extremely rare examples that are made that have portraits of people on them, but generally that's not very successful because you can't get the middle tonalities. That's probably why it was never done. I mean, there may have been a mechanism where you could have done it, but it would have been immensely difficult. People would have looked very cartoonish, so they wisely stuck with what worked and what sold. Considering how brief a time he had at the Weller Pottery in the United States, an immense amount of this ware seems to have been made. Unfortunately, a lot of misfired pieces seem to have been stored and kept around, even in things with them kind of off color, and then they were sold as seconds later on by Weller, but they were not marked as such. And whenever a company does that, a lot of companies have done that in the past. Pewabic, Rookwood, although Rookwood was better about marking their works. It sort of can pollute the whole stream for collectors because people will see a mediocre piece and the quality is often not there. Some Sicard is transcendent and some of it is very uninspired. There are some gigantic pieces, and this is quite a large piece of Sicard that I have here sort of with a wheat leaf decoration, a really beautiful color tonality on it. There are some enormous pieces that were part of the Weller had a theater in Zanesville, Ohio, where the pottery was located, and he had some very large pieces, 2 feet and better tall, that were with sunflower decoration and others on them that are just glorious. There's a handful of these still moving around in the collector market, but you will pay a fortune for them. They're very expensive. But even then, I've seen some very big pieces, and they would have been judged to be important at the time, with pretty mediocre decoration. You can have little tiny pieces that are just glorious. But sometimes it's just little waves of color, and they're sort of in love with just the color aspect of it, and they're just pretty little things, you know. And it can be, it still can be obtained at a fairly moderate price. I mean, the big pieces, big money. I mean, a little piece like this, although I cherish any Sicard I have, I mean, it just has little painted swirls. It's just a little confection of color. It's a delightful little piece, but it's nothing. It's not an investment quality thing. It's just something that would have been made up that one day to fill the kiln or something, and they do vary a lot. But a piece like this is a rare early Weller shape because it's quite delicate. Unfortunately, the pot has several hairlines in it. I mean, it hasn't survived. It's solid, but the shape was sort of inherently unstable. But if the camera can pick it up, the range of colors that we have here is from a beautiful iridescent violet to green to blue to lapis blue to gold, and it's painted all over with sort of a clover leaf motif. It's a very pretty and very successful piece, but there's nothing too emotional going on with it. In honesty, the French antecedents, the Massier and some of the potteries that were working in France that Sicard had worked for, their works aesthetically, they're a little more muted in color, but generally they are a little more ambitious aesthetically. They're a little more trained, they're a little more academic. In fact, I'm fortunate to have, this is a piece of Massier pottery from France from probably the 1890s. And it has a lovely, delicate pattern of autumn leaves sort of blowing in the wind on it. It has milkweed pods on the interior, which is really something to see. And there's an extra sort of layer of artistry that you probably won't encounter with Sicard to as great an extent. The colors on Sicard are brighter. They're less muted. There's a little less subtlety to them. It's a matter of taste. I'm surprised how much Massier there is out in the universe too. Again, major pieces, big money, but it's nice to have a couple of pieces here, for example, because I think even on tape one can get a sense of the difference, even though the same hands are sort of working in the same time period. This is a particularly cherished piece I encountered a long time ago. I mean, Sicard actually was probably, he's one of the principal reasons I wanted to make pottery in the first place. I saw these extraordinary pieces with colors and designs on them of a type that I'd never encountered before. And it's sort of, although, again, I have no desire to copy his work, some of the techniques are so elusive, and you see something as pretty as this made in a factory, and you wonder just how could this be? The pot that I'm holding is sort of an abstracted, it's either a kind of a depiction of the seasons changing one into another, or probably more likely the times of day. It's very abstract. So hopefully you will enjoy it as much as I did. Yeah, he's somebody to look at. He's somebody to look after, because the work it has that wonderful balance of being rare, precious, impossible to recreate, and yet still available, relatively available in the marketplace. It hasn't all been sort of sucked down and made unavailable. The big important pieces are not going to be easy to come by, but having an example for an arts and crafts collection would be ideal. I've seen beautiful displays where people have had 20, 30 of these pieces, and no two of them, even if they'd wanted to, they couldn't make two of them alike. And I'd like to know where you can go now to any commonplace store and find something where you've got the entire surface is covered with hand-decorated motifs, where a human being, touched every little part of these pots and made them special and made them unique. And that's why people collect antiques, because they can't find that level of workmanship in any common scenario now. And these would have been things that would have been available at just a department store back in the turn of the century. Times have changed a great deal. Well, I hope that you will look for Sicard, and I hope you will continue to join us for this series and take part in it with us. I'd love to hear your comments and requests for perhaps other things that we can be talking about. I will not be confining comments to pottery, but since my background is in pottery, it seems like a logical sort of touchstone to start with, and Sicardware is particularly beautiful. I'm going to be talking about lusters connected with a number of the other potteries, because many American potteries worked in lusters and countless Europeans. And it probably suggests an entire program just upon itself, and it'll run a little long. We may have to do it in two parts. And it's also contingent upon me being able to get images of some of the pieces that I need, because I don't know everybody. Hey, if you're out there in the universe and you want to loan me a couple of pots for this purpose, don't hesitate to call me. We might be able to work something out. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoy this episode and are enjoying the process as much as we are doing. And please join us next time. Take care.